Over the years, Iran has obviously shown its willingness and capability to launch military attacks into Iraq and into Iraqi Kurdistan. We had big examples of this in 1996, in 2017, and now just this month in March. But there are many other examples along the border of Iran deploying military force into Iraq without any notice given to Baghdad or Erbil regarding the matter. And it is, of course, worrisome to authorities in both Erbil, and it should be worrisome to authorities in Baghdad as well. One must also question whether or not the Iranian regime will eventually find itself at war in Iraq, going after perhaps authorities in Kurdistan. Things came close to that in October 2017, following the referendum on independence. And it would be a legitimate question for Kurds in Iraq to ask themselves if they will find themselves attacked by the regime in Tehran, and if so, whether or not they will be left to fend for themselves. Now, a lot depends on the details, the specifics of the situation. Part of the reason that the international community unified behind Ukraine in the current conflict was because they perceived Ukraine as having done absolutely nothing wrong, as not having provoked Russia in the slightest. Ukraine as a sovereign state had the right to pursue European integration and even NATO membership. And they saw the Russian justifications for the invasion of Ukraine as nothing more than cheap fabrications about denazifying Ukraine and so forth. So this helped Ukraine attract a lot of international sympathy and support. And something similar happened with the Kurdistan region when ISIS attacked the Kurdistan region in August of 2014, and we saw a significant amount of Western and international support for the Kurdistan region to fend off this attack. So if we get back to the question of whether or not the Kurds would find themselves facing the Iranian state's power alone were a situation to degrade into a military conflict, some of that depends on the circumstances. In general, my tendency would be to say no. The United States does not want to see the Kurdistan region of Iraq weakened or attacked by a state like Iran. And generally, we could expect some kind of American support or even intervention to prevent an all-out attack by Iran. I think this would have even materialized in October 2017 had there been sustained fighting to defend Kirkuk and other disputed territories, and the Iranians had taken a direct role and active role in the fighting. I think the political opinion in Washington, if not with the then President Trump, would have demanded American response to back Iraqi Kurdistan in such a conflict. But as we all know, the abrupt and rapid withdrawal of Peshmerga forces from Kirkuk and other disputed territories didn't leave the kind of time to put together a sustained support for the Kurds in that conflict. There was essentially not much of a conflict in 2017. So the first order of business would be that Kurds in Iraq themselves would have to be willing to stand up and defend themselves, much as Ukrainians are doing now. And after that, depending on the circumstances, I think in most plausible scenarios, they could expect a reasonable, significant and important amount of support from countries such as the United States in the face of an attack by Iran. I should also add, though, that it's hard to imagine Iran engaging in a sustained attack on the Kurdistan region. It would depend on the circumstances. 2017 was a very special moment. Most of the time, Iran prefers to go after Iranian Kurdish dissident groups with limited strikes that simply ignore Iraqi sovereignty and often the potential for civilian casualties, just in pursuit of their interests. The Iranians are not generally of a mind to invade a neighboring country like this. So it would have to be very specific circumstances. Now, regarding the comparison between the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the United States' failure to come to Ukraine's aid in a direct manner, we have to understand that Russia is a nuclear-armed power and viewed as one of the most powerful militaries in the world, although that view is perhaps being revised now as the Russian army gets bogged down north of Kiev and other cities in Ukraine. So that's very different, however, than the U.S. engaging Iran. The U.S. doesn't have the same reasons to be extremely cautious about military engagements against Iran. Iran to date is still not a nuclear power, and the Iranian military pales in comparison to the Russian military. So we shouldn't overdo the comparison, and I don't think Kurds in Iraq need to worry that just because no one is fighting on behalf of Ukraine other than Ukrainians and some volunteers in the current conflict, that the same would be the case if the Iranian state, perhaps together with Baghdad, attacked the Kurdistan region. But a lot depends on the context. Again, if the world views the Kurds as not overreaching, as simply trying to defend themselves, not trying to capture disputed territories and increase their power, but rather just trying to go about their own business, exercise their legal constitutional autonomy within Iraq, and they're attacked in the process, then the international sympathy would be on the side of the Kurds in Iraq. Public opinion and context matters in these kinds of situations. And I think the Iranian regime also doesn't want to find itself giving the United States and other Western countries an excuse to enter conflict with it, direct conflict, and severely degrade its military capacity. Iran has to be careful as well. Now, can the Security Council have any impact in such situations? Well, generally, no. I don't think the Security Council plays a great role when it's divided. It's only in rare instances, such as with the intervention in Libya around 2011, when there isn't significant division in the Security Council, mainly in this case because Muammar Gaddafi had no friends to speak of outside of sub-Saharan Africa. It's only in those very limited circumstances that the Security Council really takes action in the United Nations. As we see with Ukraine, right now, the Russian veto, and the Chinese one for that matter as well, means the Security Council is not playing any significant role. Now, with Iran, again, a lot would depend on the circumstances, but in general, Iran usually benefits from a Russian or Chinese veto in support of its core interests and against any intervention that would, Western intervention that would harm Iran in any significant way. Iran has more friends than Libya does, and more friends for that matter than Saddam Hussein did in 1990 when he made the grave mistake of invading Kuwait. That was a rare moment where, you know, the Soviet Union had just collapsed and there was no sustained Russian or remnant of a Soviet policy to back Iraq. Then the UN Security Council was able to authorize military action to expel Iraq from Kuwait in 1991. So those situations don't apply so often anymore. So I wouldn't expect a large amount of consequential action from a divided Security Council on any important matter, whether it was an Iranian invasion of Iraqi Kurdistan, and the Syrian civil war for that matter, or China and Taiwan and so forth, where we know how the veto system works. In general, however, I don't think the Kurds, within their constitutionally recognized autonomous boundaries, as recognized by the 2005 Constitution, which are the boundaries that Kurdistan enjoyed in March of 2003, I don't think the Kurds within those boundaries have to worry that much about a large-scale military attack against them. I think they have international supporters that would step in, provided they could defend themselves at least for a few days. International supporters that would step in and work with them to repel those kinds of military actions. I know many Kurds watch what's happening in Ukraine now with a good deal of trepidation, wondering if they could be next. When it comes to Bashul, to the Kurdistan region in Iraq, I don't think the parallel necessarily holds. Now, that's not the same for Rojava, for the autonomous cantons in northeast Syria. They don't have the same level of legal recognition. The international community hasn't accepted them to the same extent that they've accepted representatives and leadership of the Kurdistan regional government. And I think the population of Rojava, as we've seen on numerous occasions, has every right to be extremely fearful, especially of Turkish and Syrian incursions, where they would be left standing largely to their own devices. And this is why it's crucially important to maintain at least some U.S. troop presence within these cantons in northeast Syria. We all saw the disastrous results of the Trump administration's brief withdrawal of forces in 2019 from that area. And it would be tragic to see a repeat of these events. But all that said, everything depends on the particular context of the situation in question. And public sympathy is crucial, as we've seen again in the Ukraine conflict, where especially President Zelensky of Ukraine has managed to really rally international public opinion around Ukraine, and President Putin of Russia has done the opposite. And these issue-specific, time and context-specific elements play an important role in determining which parties get international support and which are sanctioned and left on their own. So it depends how a conflict starts and plays out when we're looking at who will support which party. Thank you.